I've been growing fruit, vegetables and flowers now for over 50 years. And here I am in a continental warm climate in southern Hungary with over 4 hectares of land, and still I do this. I grow in containers. I use a lot of them. Here's an example, night scented stocks. Take a note that I've got moisture at the base of that pot. In fact, all of them. We have had quite a bit of rain here, but just note that moisture there at the base of that pot. Even the roses on the side of the wood store, they're in containers of some description, as is that echinacea there in the middle. And I even use containers on the back of the house. This particular space here is roughly the size of the average balcony that you'd find in an apartment block. And I've had experience of living in those as well, and I've always utilised the principles of growing in containers. But is it a good thing? Well, let's find out. So growing in a container is a very easy thing to do, but there are some things that we need to consider in order to get the best possible results that we can. So let's take a look at these. We're going to begin by looking at the advantages of using a container or a pot to grow something. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned that I've lived in various locations and different styles of houses, flats or apartments, houses, bungalows, and now here in southern Hungary. But I've always grown things in pots because of the necessity to do so, or because I wanted to. And then in the case where I've had a house without any garden space, for example, I've grown houseplants. And they're all in containers or pots of some description. We've got some here, and I'm sure you may well have some at your house as well. Container growing is a very versatile thing to do. And the choice of plants to grow, edibles or non-edibles, is vast. So a deliberate pun, let's dig further into this and find out what's going on. Now, the very first thing to think about is that it's very easy to do. All you've got to do is choose the container, and that's going to depend on the space that you've got available. If you've got a small balcony, obviously you can't have a huge container, but you can use anything from a 5-gallon bucket to a great big grow bag. Some people, it's quite popular now to grow potatoes, for example, in grow bags. That's becoming more and more of a trend, but it's been around for quite some time. If you don't want to use a grow bag, you can use a 10-gallon bucket if you've got the space. But it doesn't matter what it is, the choice of containers available is huge. And it's also probably the cheapest way to start growing. So you just need a container. You don't necessarily have to buy it. You can recycle something perhaps, or upcycle. And then all you need is the compost to fill that container, and away you go. It's also very versatile and flexible. It allows you to move your containers to wherever you want them to be. But sometimes you need to move them because of the conditions that you've got. And if you've only got a very small space, like a patio garden or a balcony, as I've already shown you there, container gardening is a great alternative because it allows you to actually grow something. With the ability of being able to move your containers, you've got the opportunity to maximize the sunlight that's available to you in the shorter days and reduce the exposure of the sunlight in the hot, humid days of high summer. So for example here, where I've got the plants that we've just looked at on the patio, I don't necessarily want them there midday at the height of summer, so I can just pick them up and move them across. At the same time, those stocks that I showed you just now in the pots, I don't want all 3 of them there because they're so overpowering with their perfume. So I can leave one on that particular spot and I can move the others to different locations to get the overall effect of that perfume all around the garden. I showed you our salad leaves just now in that little box. That's on the back of the house. So that wall is north facing. It's a cool area for me, and it allows me to grow those salad leaves in that location. I don't stand a chance of growing salad leaves in the main vegetable patch because, again, the heat is so strong, the plants will never survive. So being able to move my things around, I'm still able to get a crop of something that I can't necessarily get when I'm out in the vegetable patch. So it's another great benefit. Now, there you are. you've got your vegetables or your flowers growing in your containers, and then you have to move for whatever reason that might be. Well, that's easy. Pick up your containers and you take them with them. You're taking your garden with you. Very, very portable. So you don't lose anything. Another benefit is the fact that you actually have less weeds, because if you're using the right materials in the first place to fill your containers, then you're going to have a weed-free mixture, and therefore you're going to have more time to sit back and relax and enjoy the fruits of your labour. Now, when you start your container garden, the first thing you want to be doing is filling that container with fresh compost and get it to the top of the container itself. In doing that, you're going to not only ensure less weed growth because you're not bringing some in from the garden, and secondly, your plants are going to have a really rich, healthy soil in which to grow. Therefore, you're going to have a stronger plant, a healthier plant, which is going to be prone to less pests and diseases. We've got a lot of bird activity behind us at the minute. We've got some shrikes or butcher birds out there kicking off because it is quite early in the day. But anyway, let's carry on. Another great reason to use compost as opposed to your garden soil is that compost is a lot lighter. If you fill up a container with garden soil, it's 3 or 4 times heavier than it is using compost. There's less nutritional value in there, you've got more weeds, and it's much harder to move that pot around. So stick to the compost and don't use garden soil. You want to make sure that the compost that you use is light and airy. Now for me, I just tend to use a good quality multi-purpose compost. I don't need to do anything else because I'm going to explain in a minute how I make sure my plants are okay and I maintain their nutritional balances to keep them growing in a healthy environment. The other thing about using compost is it's very difficult to overwater that plant in that container. Compost has the ability to hold on to moisture, and when it can't hold on to any more, it releases what it doesn't need. Now, at the beginning of the video, you saw that grey pot, the night scented stocks, and I pointed out the moisture below that pot. That is where we've had so much rain in the last 24 hours, highly unusual for us, that the water has been released from that compost and drained out through the base of the container itself. So that shows you there that it works very well. So like I say, very difficult to overwater a plant in a container that's filled with the compost. So we can grow absolutely anything in a container. Now you can grow small vegetables like radishes and spring onions. You can grow lobelias to trail over the edge of that container if you wanted to. So you've got flowers, you've got vegetables, you've got herbs, you've got soft fruits. Strawberries is a great example. Tomatoes is another one. Tomatoes growing in a hanging basket, tumbling over, absolutely amazing. You can even grow citrus fruits in a pot. Obviously, size dependent. If you've got the space, you can grow a lemon, for example, in there, no problem whatsoever. And the beauty of that pot is you're able then to bring it inside to protect it during the cold winter months. So overall, it all seems pretty good, yeah? But there's some things we need to consider. If you put a plant into a pot, you're going to restrict its root ball. It can't get out of that pot. A classic example of that is that I grow mints in a metal bucket, and a lot of people might grow mint in the ground, but they're advised to put it in a metal bucket first to stop those roots from spreading and therefore the mint taking over. But with that principle in mind, any plant in any pot will have its roots restricted. It can't get out of that container. So that leads on to another thing that we need to consider. Not only that we need to keep it well watered because the roots can't find water for themselves like they would do in the ground, and also that we're going to need to replace its nutrients because it can't find the nutrients, and we'll come on to that in a second. The other thing we want to think about is that if we've got a plant in a pot that's going to be there for a long time, over a period of years, for example, we need to consider the fact that we're going to need to repot that plant into a bigger container. The roses on the woodshed, as we saw at the beginning of the video, is a great example of that. They've been in there now for the last couple of years, and I expect them to be needing to be potted on next year or maybe the following year. I'll keep an eye on that and be able to check, but that is a consideration that we need to be thinking about if we choose to use containers to grow our stuff. We also want to consider choosing the right size container for the plant that we want to grow. And the best thing to do is to think about using the biggest container that you can get your hands on to grow the thing that you want to get in there. So you've got the container. Now what you want to do is you want to fill it. And what you want to do is to fill that container right up to the very top with your compost. Don't use any types of fillers. Don't use stones or anything else on the bottom or twigs to use less compost. because the roots of that plant are going to be using all of that space. So don't waste it by putting in rocks that's going to give it no benefit whatsoever. Fill the whole thing to the top with your compost. Once it's done, give it a good drink before you start planting into it, so that you've got a head start, and that plant going straight into that medium is going to be happy because it's got a drink straight away. It's not going to be shocked. If you find when you open a bag of compost, it can be quite dry. And every time I use something like that, I always give it a really good drink first before I plant into it. It's the same when you start sowing seeds in your module trays. You pack the soil or the compost into those modules, firm it all, you give it a good drink, firm it all down, then you plant into it, and away you go. The principle is exactly the same with a container, but on a bigger scale. Remember that a container will dry out faster than anything in the ground. So you want to be keeping your eye on it not drying out. Certain types of containers will dry out faster than others. Terracotta pots, for example, they may look nice, but they're quite porous, and therefore they'll lose water quicker than, say, a metal container or even a plastic container come to that. So you want to check the moisture levels on a daily basis, sometimes twice a day, depending on the temperatures. Two ways of doing that: get a soil moisture meter and put it in, but you either got to keep moving it around all the different pots, or you're going to be buying a lot of that. It's quite expensive. Or just keep an eye on it. One good way of doing it is to lift the container. If it feels very light, you know there's no water in there, give it a drink in that case. If it's quite heavy, you know it's all right. Another way of doing it: get your finger in and have a feel. That way it'll tell you quite fast as well. But remember that, as I said at the beginning, overwatering is near on impossible to do by using that compost, because, as I've said, it will hold the moisture, all the moisture that it can, and when it can't hold any more, it just releases it through the bottom of the pot. So you should be okay, but like I say, keep an eye on it, keep an eye on the plants as well. If they've got any signs of distress, you know you've got to take action. Now the plant is all potted up into its new container, it's well watered in. What else can you do? Apply a good layer of mulch on the top. That's going to help keep the moisture in. Now the final thing to consider is that when you're watering, often you're going to be flushing out the nutrients from the compost that you started off with, because it's going to come through that drainage. If you're watering properly, you will see some drainage coming through. So not only will you get a little bit of the compost coming out, but you're certainly going to lose some of the nutrients. And they are going to need to be replaced because, as we've already said, the roots can't find the nutrients. It's relying on you to give it. So we need to replenish these nutrients that are being lost through our watering. And we need to do that on a regular basis. And normally I'm looking at around about 7 to 10 days of giving it a feed of some description. Now you can do this by going to your garden centre or DIY store, wherever it might be, and buying yourself an organic liquid feed off the shelf. However, if you want to learn how to make your own liquid feeds and your own liquid amendments, then have a look at this video here, because it's going to show you how I do mine, and it's going to save you an awful lot of money. But for now, take care, and I'll catch up with you next time.